All right, so today we're going to talk about two things. We're going to talk primarily, I think, about boundaries, and we're going to cover one concept, which is the inertia of recovery. So, how do we gain the momentum? So, lots and lots and lots of books have been written on boundaries. Probably lots of books have been written on why it's so hard to get going in recovery. That's what inertia is when it's when your car is stopped, you push, and the car doesn't want to move more than a little. That's called inertia. The car has a lot of inertia, and so the question is it's just so hard to push, you just get defeated. And so you stop. Or you push for a while, you get tired of it, and then you get defeated. So so what is that inertia? What are you pushing up against? And usually it has to do with what I will call corrupted boundaries practiced for a very long time. Boundaries where there is a lot of overlap that's unhealthy, we call that enmeshment. So unhealthy plus lots of time gives rise to enmeshment. Enmeshment is when we are caught up with something messy. So, neat and orderly, messy. Very clear idea of how to come apart. It's like, the harder you pull, the more you get drawn. You know those finger traps? The finger traps, the more you pull, I think we have one, that's a bridge in Calgary. It looks like a finger trap. The harder you pull, the stronger it gets. And so, if all you ever know is pulling, the harder you pull, the tighter it gets, and the harder it gets to separate. Which is why unhealthy boundaries stay long time. Is because it's the finger trap. This finger trap started probably long before you were ever born. It started with your parents and their parents, intergenerational patterns of relating. Messy. And then you were born. And you learn what you were taught. And you get taught unhealthy boundaries, you pass lots of time, you get enmeshment. Enmeshment, to be clear, boundaries are not just about with other people. Boundaries are with yourself, with others, with ideas, with things, drugs, alcohol. Boundaries are about people, places, things, and ideas, and self. The subject of a boundary is people, places, things, ideas, self. That's what I call a holistic understanding of boundaries. If all you understand about boundaries is I don't like talking to my mom, I'm not going to talk to my mom, finger trap. Because you go and say that to her, and then she unloads the guilt trip, And now you're upset. She's probably upset. You gotta, what do? This is why people cope. Enmeshment creates, so enmeshment, if boundaries are about people, places, things, and ideas and self, enmeshment is about these things too. So the reason why people get stuck for so long, and it's so hard, there's so much inertia, can't move the car, it's really heavy, takes a lot of energy, it's because it's not just about the people. So you say, I can't talk to my child, drives me crazy. Can't talk to my wife, drives me crazy. I can't talk to my husband, drives me crazy. And if you just think about that in terms of a person in your life, your boundary won't be successful. You're confused. It's not the whole idea. It could very well be that you have certain ideas, certain ways of relating to all people, but that particularly make this one relationship difficult. And so you put a boundary with that person, you maintain it, let's say it's a no contact. This person drives me crazy, no, I'm not going to talk to them. And then you do it for a month. Oh, maybe I'll just check Facebook. And then it begins again. So when you don't take a holistic understanding to why you do what you do, you will continue to be confused by why it's hard to maintain healthy boundaries with the people, places, things, ideas in your life. Enmeshment with an idea, for a long time we call that a fantasy. Fantasy. Enmeshment plus idea is called a fantasy. And I'm just going to single this one out because, that's probably responsible for a lot of suffering in life. Enmeshment with an idea that's not based in reality is called a fantasy. Fantasies are great. In your dreams, in this and that. They're enjoyable. It's just they're not real. So, if you have a fantasy about how, mom, dad, child should relate to you, that's not based in reality, there's a lot of inertia that's going to keep that stuck. So, for example, mom should be nicer to me. So the idea that, she's always been mean to me. Okay. Mom as she is versus the childhood you wish you had. The reality is different. A lot of times, even if that person changes, they still drive you crazy. Because the problem is not that person, necessarily, entirely. It's oftentimes a fantasy of what you think should be. Something that you were owed, rightly or wrongly. The thing is that if we don't deal with the fantasies, we'll be in this situation. We have a little truck. It's got some wheels, and it's kind of stuck, and we're trying to move it. But unknown to us is there's a couple of things just like ropes stuck to it. And so you're pushing that truck, and it's hard to move because you're fighting a lot of ropes, a lot of things that kind of bind that, keep it in one place. You're pushing, so you're pushing hard. And we all know if you do something that's hard, chances are you're going to stop. If you're not making any progress, with all the effort that you have, you're going to stop, or you're going to think, it didn't move the last time. It didn't move like the 100 times before that. What's anything different now? So you're not going to want to start. That's one of the biggest things about inertia. Starting, or let's say it moves. Let's say you get an army of people. You push it real good, but the ropes are still there. And at some point you get tired of pushing. So the thing is that we are, if we are unaware of the reality of why something is so difficult, we're going to be in this state where we're pushing, something's not coming easy, and then we stop. And then something happens in life, job blows up or something, and doctor says you got to go to a anger management class, so you go again. You have another reason to do it, and then you come up against the same thing. Boundaries can be immensely healing, or they can be immensely damaging. You can wield them like a big club, and most people do, honestly. I'm going to hit you with this boundary, with the thought that if I hit you hard enough, you might learn. Learning theory is that positive, the carrot is a better source of learning than a stick. That's what learning theory holds. But boundaries are more often not wielded as a way to hurt or a way to protect. And what I'm going to talk to you today is about what you can do. Because this is the reality. Enmeshment with things in your life that you're not aware of makes it really hard to push that truck. And so you give up, you stop, and you've been doing this for decades of your life. Some periods of time you've been faster, some periods of times you've been slower. So a very common one, the reason I circle fantasy is because most of the things that corrupt your boundaries are actually blind spots inside you. And one of the biggest ones is adverse childhood experiences. That's why we like to focus on these at NUM. We like to talk about them. You didn't get enough love growing up, you're going to continue to seek it to this day. It's going to pull you like an intense pull, and you're just going to be confused as to why you do the things you do. So, recovery really can't begin until you develop and cultivate a sense of humility. What you think you know about you may not actually be the truth. A lot of people come to the clinic. The other day, they did this thing, they thought it was helpful. They had a person in their family that has addiction, and they just said, we're just going to take you to a little place, and it's all good. Just come with us. We're going to, didn't tell them that we're an addiction clinic or a mental health place, just like going for shopping. And then they come here with like a big family and this person. And the thing is that most families we work with think that person is the problem. And what we say again and again is addiction belongs to a family. It doesn't belong to any one person. Everyone has a hand in it. Why? Because boundaries, unhealthy, learned from multiple generations, right? Because we learn what we are taught. Most of what we know about boundaries is learned before you're 11 years old. I'd say 80 to 90% of your emotional learning is done, learned and done before you're 11 years old. After that, the intellect takes over, develops strategies. So what you have by 11 is what you got in terms of emotional intelligence, and boundaries is the practice of implementing emotional intelligence using your intellect. So obviously it's not going to go that great if things weren't that great from 0 to 11. And so 0 to 11 is a time period that we want to focus on, because a lot of these ropes that unknowingly bind you come from programming and defense mechanisms developed early on in life. So they could be manipulations. So if that's what you have to do to get mom's attention, manipulate, lie, guilt trip, if that's what it took, then that's what you got. And you'll continue to do it until you understand and recognize that this is a place that needs attention. So people come to me looking for, how do I set a boundary? This person drives me nuts. Good. At least they want to learn. But where they learn, it has to be looking at self. And if you are willing to join us in that journey, then what you can get, I'm just going to move this over a little bit. What you can get is this idea of what we call compassionate. Compassionate boundaries. You have to understand inertia, another way of saying this thing with inertia, why it's so difficult, it's actually just, it's as simple as every day we make 10 or 100,000 decisions. Every day you make hundreds of thousands of decisions. I'm going to brush my teeth. I'm going to pick up the toothbrush. I'm going to do this. I'm going to say this. You're making hundreds of thousands, probably millions, probably billions. I don't know. A lot. The yogis say every blink of the eye, which is 0.1 seconds, that's 1,000 thoughts that are generated by the mind. So we're constantly making decisions. So how you end up here, people want an easy answer for the inertia. Why is it so difficult to start, and why is it so difficult to maintain? You didn't end up here overnight. If you're 30, 40, 50, 60 years old, that's 30 years of making a decision, and every decision, I call this the fork in the road principle. Every decision you make leads you to a fork in the road. And that fork in the road is simply this. It's recovery or it's not recovery. Simple. There's the recovery decision, which is for the highest good of all. A recovery boundary, I call that a compassionate boundary. And then there's everything else. A recovery decision takes you up. A not recovery decision takes you down. Think about this. Hundreds of thousands of millions of decisions being made by you every day for the last 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, however old you are. And if you're not conscious, if you're governed by the programming, the 0 to 11, what you've been taught, if that's what determines your actions, and it is, if you're unconscious about it, it is. The inner child that's upset, hurt, that governs your day-to-day decisions. If you're unconscious and you're not aware, you go to your automatic, and your automatic is what you've been practicing for 30, 40, 50 years, hundreds of thousands of times a day. This is why the inertia is there. This is why it's so hard to start. This is why it's so hard to continue. Because you need to understand that if you've been through a lot, you've had good times in your life, you've had not so good times, and every decision comes down to this fork. And so, you make this decision, not recovery, oh, maybe throw a good recovery one in there, not recovery, and so you land yourself kind of in a low health situation. How you get out of that is simply this: one conscious decision at a time. I told someone the other day, or he told me actually. We run a housing facility, and occasionally I inspect people's, just to kind of make sure things are okay out there, because it's housing people with addiction can be exciting sometimes. So the bed wasn't made, and I said to him, "Gotta make your bed, man. You get up, you don't make your bed, you start your day with a non-recovery decision. And every decision carries a momentum to it. The more non-recovery you do, the later it gets in the day, the more likely you're, I don't feel like you set yourself up for it. But you know what? You wake up fresh-ish. That's the best time in the morning to make a recovery decision. And guess what? You make one recovery decision, it becomes easier to make the next one. It becomes easier to make the next one. And even if it takes you 30, 40, 50 years to get here, it does not take you 30, 40, 50 years to get out of here. If you start making recovery decisions, magically, you actually end up getting a lot better, a lot faster. Just one decision at a time. So in AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, they talk about this. Every alcoholic I've ever met has a complex trauma history. It's just true. No one really talks about it. I'll talk about it. It's just the reality. No one gets into deep addiction, messed up stuff without having a lot of adversity in life. You don't get to that without that. So in AA, they talk about one day at a time. The best way to remind yourself about how hopeless your situation is to think about all of these ropes and think about, you might have noticed this as I was talking, it's a lot, Dr. Gill, You do this to yourself. You entertain how big this thing is, and you defeat yourself right there. Rather than really, the reality is, one step in the right direction reverses many, many days of bad decisions. Just one decision today, mindfully. The better you get at identifying conscious decisions, and you know what, there's downtime, sometimes you slip, you just get back up, because every fork in the road leads you to a new fork in the road. You messed up last week. Hey, today's a new day, you can make your bed today, can't you? One recovery decision creates a chain reaction for more recovery decisions. That's why in the principles we talk about, if you want to do something big, start with one step. Don't look up, don't look at how big that mountain is. because you're going to say, forget it. Let's go play video games. Let's go get drunk. Let's just do the same enmeshed thing we've been doing for a long time. Whine and complain about how life wasn't great. Commiserate, vent with friends that are using you for the same thing. There's all sorts of ways that you stay stuck. The way out, we call it our 3C practice. Just connect to self, connect to others, and commit to daily practice. C2S, C2O, and CDP. I don't know if I'll use that again, but the point is, boundaries, the biggest thing people get confused about is they're not looking at themselves. So they get lost on the strategy. If you've lived with an alcoholic for 30 years of your life, you can't be normal. I'm sorry. I'm sorry if that offends you. my humblest apologies. But if you've been living with an alcoholic for 30 years, or you grew up with one, you can't be healthy in your mind. Why? Because you have to cope. You have to make do in suboptimal circumstance, figure it out, and you learn a way of interacting that maximizes safety at that time. And that's all important. It's helpful, it's good. Who knows, maybe without that you would have been in the 80 people a week with suicide in Canada. 50 men, 30 women. So I don't say anyone's addiction's bad, I don't say anything, but you have to understand that if you have a hard time with a boundary, it's just hard for you to say no. People usually get stuck on two sides of a boundary. They either say yes, 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 and they can't say no, or all they ever say is no. I call it on the too much, I like to use the word love. Soft love, when it's corrupted, becomes enablement. Tough love, when it's corrupted, becomes mean. And both are just as damaging. And both will happen, though, or you'll yo-yo. You know, you might have seen that. You're overly hard, then you feel bad, and then you buy them a car, or do something nice. And so I suggest, and what I'm suggesting is the vast majority of thing that determines your boundary with people is actually your relationship to self. As people do the work on this, you'd be amazed at how quickly their ability to relate to others changes. One step at a time. In AA, they say something really cool. They say, you will be amazed before you're halfway through. Why? You start looking at yourself, building a healthy relationship with yourself. You'll be amazed at how effortlessly you can solve problems that used to baffle you, make you crazy. Why was I having so much difficulty with Mom? It's so simple. Oh, yeah, I just, if I talk about A, B, and C with her, it's okay. If I talk about C, D, and E, it's not. So I just talk about A, B, and C. Done. You have to understand, you have to understand that these when you relate to a person, you don't actually have to talk to them about the deep things. If it's hard for you to talk to them about the deep things, you can still talk to them about superficial things. Codependent thinking is all or nothing. Either I'm like talking about deep things or I'm not talking at all. But that's not reality. Reality is, if you have a damaged relationship with someone, then the way it happens is you get closer and closer. And then you overlap a little bit. And then you overlap a decent amount. What people with unhealthy boundaries do is they do this. They go from apart, deep in people's business. That doesn't go so well, and then they go back to apart. It's the yo-yo, but every repetition of that damages, and it depletes the life energy of that relationship. So if you yo-yo your relationships, you're separated, you get way too deep, and then you separate again, it blows up. At some point, you're sapping the energy of that relationship, and it will come to an end, eventually, unless you're married to a saint. But a saint probably wouldn't stand for this. So, relationships take time. They move back and forth between states, and they become more and more stable. And so I know I said I'd be talking about boundaries, but probably not the way you thought I would. Here you say this to this person, say that. The why of boundaries is so much more infinitely important than the how. You can find 1 billion books on what to say, assertive communication. None of that's your problem. Or rather, that's a problem easily fixed. But there's a reason you're not fixing it. And it's because you have a lot of blind spots in areas that are governing your decision. If you watch kids, Sally, what happened? Oh, I don't like Joe. Why don't you just talk to Joe? Yeah, he's a jerk. He's always been a jerk. All my life he's been a jerk. Well, how long have you known him? A week. How many times have you heard this statement, when you see two adults arguing, it's like seeing children? That's actually true. Because every adult has a child inside of them. That's the age of that child is governed by how much safety they had growing up. And if they haven't had a lot of work, therapy, stuff they've done, connect to self, connect to other, if they haven't done a ton of that stuff, chances are that child's going to be still that old. And when you get stressed, amygdala fires, you're that child who looks like an adult, but you're relating as a child, you're as far-sighted as a child, and you get into the same mess of a child, except you're not a child, you're an adult, and adult consequences are going to apply to you. And that's why life gets messy. So breaking that cycle, we have to start with the why of boundaries, not the how. A compassionate boundary is for the highest good of all. I'm going to underline all. Your boundary, if it's a compassionate boundary that's going to uplift, it has to be good for the other person and you. So if you're drawing a boundary and you have no care whatsoever for that other person, chances are you've made another non-recovery decision, amygdalar decision. And maybe it's the right decision. Maybe you need space, right? But the thing is that a true boundary is what I call a compassionate boundary. That's for the highest good of all. It uplifts everyone. That does not make it pleasant. My dad has a bit of a habit. He likes to sort of talk to me about people in my life that I have close relationships with. And love my dad, but I'm not going to listen to that. I choose what I consume with my senses. I will not consume certain things because it's just energy. It's like eating a donut. I don't want to eat a donut. My body has to work that through. It takes energy. Why waste energy? I'm just not going to eat the donut. Don't listen to gossip, because Once you've listened, you can't unlisten. Your mind will have to work it through. The easiest decision you have is to not consume. But once you've consumed, your mind will work it through. Once you look at someone else's spouse, once you look at their money, once you look at their nice car, you have consumed. And now your mind has to spend the energy to work it through and maybe make a bad decision or two. The best, easiest decision you have is to not look, not listen. A boundary, for the highest good of all, is not good for a gossiper, for you to listen to their gossip. It enables them, it makes them think they're popular, it makes them think that it's useful, it makes them, so you putting a boundary, saying, I'm not going to listen to that, is good for them. They may not like it, they may blow up at you, but you have served them and you've served yourself. That's a compassionate boundary. Versus, I don't like you, you're a jerk. I'm not going to talk to you. Self-serving. But you're amygdala, so you're not thinking about the other person. And so, when you are calm, when you are in a place of regular self-therapy, you'll be able to determine and differentiate boundaries that are for the highest good of all. And when you do that, one step at a time, when you stop weighing yourself down with how far you have to go and thinking about all that, everyone can make one recovery decision in a day. You have hundreds of thousands of bad ones, make one good one. And you'd be amazed what happens when you start living your life minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day. Versus, I haven't achieved anything in 30 years, now I got to make it up tomorrow. I don't blame you for not starting. It's a lot of pressure. But that's your pressure. You've made that pressure. One step at a time, and your boundaries will go from enmeshment to compassionate. And your stress level will come down 1 billion times. People who live with enmeshed boundaries have a constant high level of stress. When you have boundary violations happening, yours and others, high stress, constant stress. And so, once you start discovering this through the daily practice, you'll all of a sudden find that it's actually not that hard to have hard conversations that preemptively deal with your stress. That's really what boundaries are about, and boundaries are all about the why, not the how. And so I think that's a good place for us to stop this segment. In the next segment, we'll just have some question and answers. So my sincerest apologies if I misspoke. I thank you for listening.